Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. How many of you were here last night or were somewhere else at the time? All right, how many of you are here right now? Here right now. Okay, that's all that matters. If you're here right now, we can move on. As you know, last night we were going through the evidence for I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, and we said there are 4 questions you need to answer. Does truth exist? Does God exist? Are miracles possible? And is the New Testament true? Now, in case you weren't here last night and you want to see what we did, you can text evidence to 44222, and this entire PowerPoint presentation in a PDF format will send to you. I'll send you the first chapter, Stealing from God, and some other stuff as well. All those resources are somewhere on the book table, I think, in the cafeteria, so if you want to go further, you can, including the complete DVD set there. Now, we were going through 3 arguments for the existence of God, and we had gone through the cosmological argument last night, the evidence that the universe had a beginning. If it had a beginning, there must be a beginner, and that beginner must be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent. And we had also gone through some of the teleological argument, the design argument, that the universe is fine-tuned. That if you were to change any one of a number of aspects about the universe, there would be no universe, there certainly would be no life. And we had gone through all that last night, and we talked about how incredibly designed the universe is, and then we were about to discuss how designed life is. This is where we ended last night, so let's pick it up right here. And we said that the universe, while it's incredibly fine-tuned, it's designed to unimaginable degrees, the universe is not made in the image of God, but you are. In fact, this is you in the womb at 11 weeks. Question, is this animal, mineral, vegetable, or human? Yeah, that's a human being right there. In fact, let's go back even further than 11 weeks. Let's go all the way back to when your mother and your father got together to conceive you. Have you guys had this talk before? I see some young people in here, so I'll try and be discreet. I also see some older people in here, so I'll try and be discreet as well, just in case you've forgotten how this works. But when your mother and your father got together to conceive you, your mother unconsciously perfumed her egg to attract your father, and then your father sent the entire population of the United States, 300 million soldiers, toward your mother's egg. And then there was a race. And you won! Don't let anyone ever tell you you're not special. You beat out 300 million others. You have blown away anything Michael Phelps has done. In fact, seeing some of you limp in here earlier makes it hard for me to believe you were the fastest soldier in the gene pool. But you were! Now, your soldier was 20 to 30 times smaller than a grain of salt. Yet it contained half of the genetic information that makes you you. And that half of the genetic information that makes you you is half of a 3.2 billion letter software program we call your genome. All the letters in the right order. And your mother's egg, which is about the size of a period at the end of a sentence in an average book, contained the other half of that 3.2 billion letter software program. All the letters are in the right order. And when your soldier and your egg came together, a new 100% genetic human being was created. You know, you have not received any more genetic information from that point until right now. Your genetic information has just duplicated itself. In fact, there were only 4 things separating you from adulthood: time, air, water, and food. Those are the same 4 things that separate a 2-year-old from adulthood. Does this have implications on the abortion issue? Yeah. We don't kill the 2-year-old. Why do we kill the unborn child in the womb? Genetically, it's the same. You say, time out, Frank. You can't legislate morality. All right, no extra charge for this, friends. This actually was the subject of our first book called Legislating Morality. All laws legislate morality. Every law declares one behavior right and the opposite behavior wrong. You can't think of a law which doesn't declare one behavior right and the opposite behavior wrong. All laws legislate morality. The only question is, whose morality will we legislate? And when people say, don't impose your morality on me, I say, why not? Would that be immoral? And why are you imposing your morality on me right now? You're saying you ought not impose ought nots while you're imposing an ought not on me. But actually, the better answer is this. When they say, don't impose your morality on me, I say, this isn't my morality. I didn't make this stuff up. I didn't make up the fact that murder's wrong, that rape is wrong, that theft is wrong, that abortion's wrong, that men were made for women and women were made for men, and that the best way to perpetuate and stabilize society, which is the reason the government's involved in marriage at all, is to legally recognize that relationship over every other relationship. I didn't make any of this stuff up. This isn't my morality. This isn't your morality. This is the morality. The one that Thomas Jefferson said was self-evident. The one the Apostle Paul said, even the Gentiles are not have the law of the law written on their hearts in Romans chapter 2. Everybody already knows this morality, but some people just don't like it. So if you have a problem with the morality, you don't have a problem with me. You have a problem with the Creator whose very nature is the reason we have this morality. All right, no extra charge for that. Let's go back to this. From this point until right now, a construction project of astonishing complexity began taking place. Cells began multiplying at a rate of 4,000 cells per second. Brain cells began multiplying at a rate of 100,000 cells per second, for most of you anyway. Some cells became brain cells, others heart cells, others lung cells. How did they know how to do this? Nobody knows. Some cells went so far across you to become what they needed to become that it would be equivalent to you today walking across the United States alone. And that construction project continues to this very moment. You just made 4 million new red blood cells. You just made another 4 million new red blood cells. You just made another 4 million new red blood. Knock it off. How do you know how to do this? Are you thinking about this? Are you thinking about, wait a minute, time out, Frank. I got to make new red blood cells. Got to concentrate. Hang on. No. This is happening. You're not even thinking about it. How is it happening? In fact, have you noticed that all of nature is going in a consistent direction? I mean, Aristotle recognized this 2,400 years ago. What did he recognize? He said nature goes in a direction. Take, for example, an acorn. Why does an acorn, if it's properly nourished, always become an oak tree? Why doesn't it become an elm tree or a birch tree or a seahorse? Because it's programmed to become an oak tree. Well, who programmed it? And is an acorn conscious? Is an acorn sitting in the ground going, all right, what do I have to do to become an oak tree? No. But if you nourish that thing, it's reliably going to go in the direction of becoming an oak tree. It does not have a mind of its own, yet it consistently goes in a direction. If it doesn't have a mind of its own, yet it consistently goes in a direction, there must be an external mind directing it toward an end. That end. This is what Aristotle called the unmoved mover. This is what Thomas Aquinas called God. He said, this is going to be my fifth way to argue for God. That everything in nature is going in a direction. Things that are conscious and unconscious. They all have a direction to them. And especially those things that don't have a mind of their own, they are being directed by an external mind. That mind is God. And this argument, by the way, works whether or not the universe had a beginning. Aristotle mistakenly thought the universe was eternal, and he said, even if the universe is eternal, every second the universe exists, it needs a cause. Not a horizontal cause way back here, a vertical cause right now. That's directing things. This is why Paul said, in Christ we live and move and have our being. And Christ holds all things together. And the writer of Hebrews says that God sustains all things by his powerful word. In other words, God just doesn't create the universe and then he leaves it. That would be deism. God creates the universe and he sustains it every second. He's sustaining the processes and he's sustaining the natural laws and everything going on with us right now every single second. If he were to pull his hand away, we'd go out of existence. In fact, God is to the universe what a band is to music. The band was just up here playing music, right? When the band was playing music, the band was creating the music and sustaining the music. What happened to the music the second the band stopped playing? Music was over. Same thing is true with God. He creates the universe, he creates you, he creates all the natural forces, and he creates everything that exists. And every second that goes on, he's sustaining it. I mean, do you ever wonder why the laws of nature are so consistent and persistent? Why do they do the same thing over and over again? This is certainly not the result of randomness. This is the result of an orderer. In fact, you wouldn't even know what random was unless you knew what order was. And so there's an orderer, a consistent cause, a vertical cause every second, sustaining this universe. Now, we spend a lot of time in the book stealing from God on this if you want to go further. But don't buy the idea that God just creates the universe and then leaves it. He's sustaining it every single second. Now, let's move now to the third argument for the existence of God. We've covered the two scientific ones, the cosmological and teleological argument. Now let's look at the moral argument. Let's say that, and by the way, this argument here might be the most, what philosophers call existentially relevant. What does that mean? It means the argument that is most relevant to people in their everyday lives. I mean, you don't have to think about the beginning of the universe or the design of the universe, but it's real hard not to think about morality because we deal with it every day, right? We deal with right and wrong every day. And 70% of the questions that I get on a college campus are in some way related to morality. There's some moral issue going on. Either it's a sexual issue, or it's the evil question, which is related to morality, or it's a question about what about those that have never heard. These are all moral questions, actually. Let's say you go out on a hike somewhere. You go way out in the woods alone, and you get turned around. You've been out hiking for 3 or 4 hours, and your cell phone's dead, and you can't figure out the direction from which you came. You know the direction from which you came, but you just can't figure out where it is right now. All you have to get you home is a magnetic compass. And as you know, a magnetic compass is always supposed to point to magnetic north. So if you can figure out where north is, you can figure out how to get home. But you take out your compass, and instead of your compass pointing to magnetic north, your compass, no matter which way you turn, always points to you. How helpful would that compass be? It's not going to be very helpful at all, right? You know where you are. You're trying to figure out where north is. Well, why do we think as Christians that if the compass of life doesn't always point to us, that somehow either God doesn't exist, he's evil, or he's forgotten about us? Yesterday, you guys we sang a song in here called Jesus. I can't remember the name of it, but it said, everything revolves around Jesus. You remember that we were singing that last night? Everything revolves around Jesus. We don't live that way, do we? We think everything revolves around us. If the compass doesn't point to us, God's evil, or he's forgotten about us. Do you realize that whether or not God exists, you are not the center of the universe? And neither am I. And by the way, is there a moral compass to life? Is there a right way to live life, or can you just live life any way you want? Do we determine right and wrong, or do we discover right and wrong? What do you think? At least one pastor said we discover. Everyone else is going, survey the youth in the church today. At least half of them are going to say, oh no, we determine right and wrong. Whatever's right for me. I was, actually 3 years ago now, I was at a church in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And we're going through the I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist material on a Sunday morning, Sunday night, Monday night, Tuesday night. We had to spend a lot more time on it than we can do here. And we had the microphone set up just like we have today. And the second night I was there, a couple of young men in their 20s got up to the microphone and they were atheists. I didn't think anything of it. If you call something I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, atheists are going to show up, right? And so during the Q&A, they expressed skepticism about God. Anyway, I tried to answer their questions as best as I could. The last night I was there, about a 50-year-old man got up to the microphone, and he had a question written on 2 sheets of paper. And he began to read the question. 10 seconds into the question, he broke down crying. He couldn't go any further. So I walked off the platform, I went down to him, and he handed me these 2 sheets of paper, and all he said was, "Read it, read it." So I began to read it to myself as I'm walking back up to the platform. I'm trying to digest this 2-page question. And by the time I got back up to the platform, I realized that man, whose name turned out to be Steve, was upset for 2 reasons. Reason number 1, Steve had just learned recently that a supposed friend of his, another 50 or so year old man by the name of Tom, had been sexually abusing Steve's daughter from the time she was age 4 to the time she was age 14, right in his own home, under his nose, never saw it. He said, "This guy was like Jesus to us. He was always walking around with his Bible, and if something came up, he'd always say, 'Let's pray.' The whole thing was a big sham." The second reason Steve was upset was because the 2 young men who were there the night before, who were atheists, were his sons, who used to be Christians but are now atheists. Because as soon as they heard what happened to their sister, they said, "A good God wouldn't have allowed this to happen. There is no God." In fact, one of them was going to a Roman Catholic seminary to become a priest, and after he heard this, he said, "That's it, I'm done with God." He walked out of the seminary, and he's an atheist today. So I said to him, "Steve, it's okay to be mad at God temporarily. In fact, some of the Bible writers seem to be mad at God, right? Read Habakkuk, read the Psalms. God, where are you? Why is this happening? It's okay temporarily. God can take it. But I hope at some point your sons are going to realize this is not a good argument against God. In fact, it's actually an argument for God." And I said, "Steve, when the right time comes, I want you to say this to your sons. If there is no God, then what that 50-year-old man did to your sister isn't really wrong. It's just your opinion. Because if there is no standard beyond humanity, then everything's just a matter of opinion. That's just your opinion against his. Where did Tom's compass point? It pointed to him. He's got his own compass. If there is no true compass, how can you say his compass is wrong? You can't. And this does not disprove God, it actually shows God. Why? Because this wouldn't even be evil unless good existed, and good wouldn't exist unless God existed. In fact, C.S. Lewis put it this way. He was an atheist, as you know, early on in life, and he thought atheism was true because of this problem of evil. There's too much evil in the world. There's too much injustice in the world. And then one day he had an epiphany, and he realized his argument didn't work, and here's why. He ultimately wrote it, of course, in the book Mere Christianity. He said, "As an atheist, my argument against God was that the universe seems so cruel and unjust. But how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? Of course there can't be injustice unless there's justice. But justice doesn't exist unless God exists. Because God, by the way, is the standard of what we mean by justice. If the atheists are right, and we're just molecular machines, there's no immaterial realm, we're just moist robots, then there's no such thing as a moral law, there's no such thing as rightness or justice. Everything's just a matter of opinion, and everyone in this room knows that's not true. In fact, it could be put this way. The shadows prove the sunshine. In order to have shadows, you have to have sunshine. In other words, in order to have evil, you have to have good. Oh, you can have sunshine without shadows. You can have good without evil, but you can't have shadows without sunshine. You can't have evil without good. Why? Because evil is a lack in a good thing. It doesn't exist on its own. Evil is like cancer. If you take all the cancer out of a good body, you got a better body. If you take all the body out of the cancer, you got nothing. It doesn't exist on its own. So evil doesn't disprove God. It actually shows that God does exist. In fact, I said there's one other thing. Well, I gotta preface this. The guy who did this, as I say, his name is Tom. Everybody in the community outside of Sioux Falls, South Dakota knows he's guilty, but he's not in jail. Why? Because every time the trial comes up, Jessica, the girl who was abused, psychologically checks out. She can't testify against him. Why not? Well, she wanted to marry him. She didn't know. If she doesn't testify, he doesn't go to jail. So I said to Steve, Steve, when the right time comes, I want you to say this to your sons. If there is no God, then the man who did this to your sister will never get justice. Why? Not going to get justice here on earth if she doesn't testify. And he's not going to get justice in the afterlife because according to atheism, there is no afterlife. Do you really think that's the way the universe is? Do you really think there's no such thing as justice? The very reason you're upset, rightfully so, is because you know a great injustice has been done. But there can't be injustice unless there can't be something that's immoral unless something is. Something can't be not right unless something is. So his son's very reactions show that they think there's injustice. Well, if they think there's injustice, they have to think there's justice. In fact, by the way, justice, as I mentioned yesterday in the breakout session, justice is an active virtue. What does that mean? Something must be done for justice to be done. And in order for justice to be done, you need a being like God. Why? You need a being that knows everything that's gone wrong and a being that has the power to right it at some point. Only God can do that. Only God is the standard of rightness, and only God can right all wrongs in the afterlife. We can't do it here. There's a lot of injustice in this world that's never righted. Only God can do this. Now, Jessica, the one who was abused, when she hit 18, I think she's 19 now, maybe 20, decided she was going to do something positive with this awful experience. She actually wrote a book. Here it is. Not Your Princess by Jessica Mitchell. I read one chapter of this book and couldn't read any more. You can get this on Amazon right now. Why am I telling you this? Because her father, Steve, wants as many people to know about this as possible, because this happens in American households too often. In fact, if a young person ever comes to you and says, Uncle Joe did this to me, do not dismiss it. Oh, Uncle Joe would never do that. How do you know? You think the kid's making it up? These kids have no place to turn because sometimes their parents don't even believe in them. Sometimes their parents are the culprits. Now, is the sexual abuse of children evil? If it's evil, then God exists. Now you can ask the question, why would God allow this to continue? That's a whole other question. We deal with it a little bit in the book Stealing from God. But what you can't say is God doesn't exist, because this wouldn't even be evil unless God existed. By the way, we were in Indiana University last April, and we streamed the events on Facebook. And my video guy, Clint, was on Facebook kind of watching the comments, and he goes, hey, Frank, Steve Mitchell's watching. I said, ask him how Jessica is. Well, Jessica felt the Holy Spirit calling on her, and so she started going back to church. But as of last April, Jessica was still in a treatment program in San Diego at $15,000 per month. She has multiple personalities, which is common when this kind of thing occurs. You know, our culture wants to tell us that sex is just physical. That's a lie. If sex is just physical, why is Jessica in a treatment program at $15,000 a month? If sex is just physical, why is it worse if somebody rapes you than if somebody just physically assaults you? Because sex is not just physical. It's spiritual, it's emotional, it's moral. it's so much more than just physical. Sex is like fire. You put it in your fireplace, it's wonderful. It'll warm you. You get it anywhere else in your house, it will burn your house down. Maybe not immediately, but over the long term. And everyone in here knows that, but we like to play with fire, don't we? You have sex with somebody, everything changes forever. So, God's nature is morality's true north. If he doesn't exist, then nothing's ultimately right or wrong. And if there's anything that's obvious, it's that certain things are right and other things are wrong. This is why atheists who are out there in the public square arguing for rights have to steal rights from God, because without God, there's no rights. There's no wrongs. Everything's just a matter of opinion. So ask people who are bringing these things up. Well, you say you got a right? Why do you have this right? Where do rights come from? They don't come from governments. Governments secure rights. They come from God. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men were created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. If there's no God, there's no rights. So, from those three arguments, the cosmological, teleological, and moral arguments, it seems that we can have a being from these arguments that flows naturally from them, that's spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent, moral, a creator who creates all things and sustains all things. That being appears to be a being that could be the God of the Bible. Do we know it's the God of the Bible right now? No. It could be Allah, or just the God of the Old Testament. Actually, it couldn't be Allah at this point. Why can't it be Allah? Does anyone know? What do Muslims say about Allah? Is Allah essentially good? No, whatever Allah does is good. Allah is basically arbitrary. So he couldn't be the standard of righteousness. Whereas Christianity believes that God is the standard. His nature is goodness. However, I put Islam in there because it is a theistic religion. What's going to help us discover which theistic religion is true? For that, we got to go to the third point: are miracles possible? Because God can do a miracle to tell us which one of these theistic world religions is true. Is it Judaism? Is it Christianity? Is it Islam? So let's move on to the third question: are miracles possible? Let me ask you a question. Before there were any mass communication, let's go back like 500 years. If one king in a particular jurisdiction wanted to communicate with another king in another jurisdiction, how could he do so? What would he send? He would send a message. And what would be on that message to confirm that the message came from the king? A seal. There would be a seal on the message that would say, hey, this thing came from the king. It would seem to me that that seal would have to have a couple of characteristics in order to be effective. Number one, it'd have to be unique to the king, right? Because if everybody had the seal, they could send messages, and you wouldn't know if it really came from the king. And second, it would have to be difficult to forge. Because again, if you could forge the seal, then again, you could send fake messages from the king. It seems to me this is what miracles are for. Miracles are like a seal from the great king, a message that says, hey, this guy speaks for me. Listen to him. In fact, you might ask yourself the question, what is the purpose of miracles? Let's just say in the Bible. Why are they even there? What are miracles supposed to do for us? Well, if you think about it, the miracle confirms the message. The sign confirms the sermon. For example, why are people going to follow Moses? Because Moses can do miracles. And when you look at the Bible, I mean, people think that miracles are occurring in the Bible throughout biblical history. That's actually not true. How many miracles are there in the Bible? Approximately. Anyone know? How many? This is the interactive portion of the program. About 250, depending upon how you count them. Some of them are bunched up. But let's just say we've got 250 miracles, and just to make the math easy, let's just start at Abraham, about 2000 BC, and take that all the way through Jesus. So for 2,000 years, we've got 250 miracles, which means on average, how often do you get a miracle? Math majors? 250 into 2,000 is 8, right? You get one miracle every 8 years. But do they occur that way? Do you get a miracle, and 8 years later you get another miracle, and 8 years later you get another miracle, and 8 years later? No. Now, one miracle every 8 years, that's not a lot, is it? No, how do you get the miracles? When do you get the miracles? When do miracles occur? Well, when God is doing miracles through people, he bunches them in 3 basic time periods: Moses, Elijah and Elijah, and Jesus and the apostles. Moses, Elijah and Elijah, and Jesus and the apostles. Why? Because these people have new revelation that needs new confirmation. There's a new sermon that needs a new sign. Why are people going to follow Moses? He can do miracles. Why are people going to move away from apostasy and go back to the true Yahweh, the true God? Elijah and Elijah can do miracles. Why should people listen to the new covenant? Why should people follow Jesus and the apostles? Because they can do miracles. That's the reason for miracles. It's not random. Miracles aren't done in the Bible like card tricks, right? They're not there to entertain. They're there for a particular reason. And there aren't that many of them, actually. And, of course, as you know, in today's culture, some people believe miracles are impossible. For example, Noah and the ark. All right, can we just admit this right now? We won't let this get out, but can we just admit right now that Noah and the ark is crazy? Admit it. When you got to go in the public square and defend Noah and the ark, yeah, right, please. Crazy. And of course, a resurrection. Everyone I know who's dead is still dead, right? Our entire worldview is based on something none of us have ever seen. You believe in a resurrection, really? Come on. Everyone I know who's dead is still dead. And for some reason, the big problem miracle in the Bible is Jonah. Is that a whale of a tale or a tale of a whale? I mean, what's the deal with Jonah? Can you really believe in Jonah? It's silly. What is the greatest miracle in the Bible? The greatest miracle in the Bible. Once a presentation, we have to use that. The greatest miracle in the Bible is not Jonah. No, it's not the resurrection. It's not Noah. The greatest miracle in the Bible is the first verse. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. If that verse is true, every other verse is at least possible, right? I mean, if it's true that God can create the universe out of nothing, can he raise Jesus from the dead? Can he walk on water? Can he part the Red Sea? Can he do the Jonah miracle? Of course Noah's crazy, unless God exists. Of course Jonah's crazy, unless God exists. Of course resurrections don't happen, unless God exists. And here's the interesting thing. We actually have atheists admitting evidence for the first verse in the Bible. They're saying the same thing Genesis 1:1 is saying, that there was a beginning. Well, if there was a beginning, it seems to me there must be a beginner. If space, matter, and time had a beginning, then God can do whatever he wants. That's not logically impossible inside the universe, right? If he can create the whole universe out of nothing, he can do whatever he wants. It's not logically impossible inside the universe. He can do any of these things right here. Now, some of you are saying, wait a minute, Frank. You just said something I don't agree with. You said God can do whatever he wants. It's not logically impossible. I thought you said God can do anything. No, there's even some things God can't do. What can he do? He can't do logically impossible things. Like what? Like he can't create a married bachelor. I know some guys try, but no, they're still married, right? Doesn't exist. Can't create a one-ended stick. Doesn't exist. Can't create a square circle. Doesn't exist. Can't create an honest politician. I mean, there's some things that are just too hard for God. In fact, you can do some things that God can't do. What can you do that God can't do? Lie? How's he going to lie? He's the standard of truth. Change? What's he going to change from? He's already perfect. If he could do those things, he wouldn't be the standard. He wouldn't be God. So God is the very standard by which everything else is judged. Now, let me just say a couple of other quick things about miracles. A lot of people don't believe in miracles or say they can't believe in miracles because they've never seen one. That actually is not a good reason to disbelieve in miracles. Why? Because you believe in a lot of things you've never seen. You believe in your mind. Have you ever seen it? You're using it right now, I hope. You believe in the laws of logic, the laws of mathematics. You ever seen them? You believe in justice. Have you ever seen justice? Now, you may have seen justice done, but you've never seen justice. It's not a physical thing. In fact, when I sometimes debate atheists, I'll ask them the question, how much carbon is in the justice molecule? And they'll say, well, that's a stupid question. Yeah, it is a stupid question, but it's not a stupid question for you because you're a materialist. You think everything's made of molecules, yet you're over here saying that certain things are unjust. So you must believe in justice. Well, that means you've got to figure out how justice could be a molecule. Justice isn't a molecule. You believe in love. You've never seen love. Love is an immaterial virtue. It's a value. It's not something physical that you see. You may have seen it done, but you've never seen it in itself. You believe in George Washington. Never seen him. Why do you believe in George Washington? Because there's historical evidence he existed. He's left some effects behind. So we reason from the effects to the cause. That's how we know God exists. We don't see God directly. We reason from the effect to the cause. We know there's a creation. We know there must be a creator. We have a moral law written on our hearts. We know there must be a moral lawgiver. We reason from effect to cause. That's what scientists do. What caused this particular effect? So, just because you haven't seen something doesn't mean you should deny it happened or deny it exists. You believe in a lot of things you've never seen. And by the way, you shouldn't expect to see a lot of miracles, if any, if God exists. Certainly now. Why? Because miracles, by definition, must be rare if they're going to get our attention. I mean, if miracles occurred all the time, then they wouldn't be considered miracles. We'd say, hey, this is some sort of natural phenomenon. It happens all the time. The very reason miracles get our attention is because most of the time they don't occur. The only way you could identify a miracle is against the backdrop of repetitive natural laws. I mean, imagine if resurrections occurred all the time. What would the resurrection of Christ mean to us? Nothing. You go to somebody, you go, Jesus rose from the dead to prove he was God. And that he actually died to save you from your sins. The guy goes, so what? Uncle Leroy just rose from the dead 2 weeks ago. Now I got to give the inheritance back. Yeah. No, it's got to be a rare event if it's going to get our attention. If it's a regular event, then it doesn't get our attention. In fact, this stuff happens all the time. And if it didn't happen all the time, we'd call it a miracle. But how many people in here have ever seen their own children born? You ever see that happen? Now, when you see that, you don't go, evolution, right? You go, how does this happen? It happens every day. We don't call it a miracle, but you know there's intelligence behind that. That just doesn't happen. By the way, one other thing, last thing about miracles. A lot of people will say, well, miracles don't occur because natural laws can't be, they're immutable. They can't be changed. First of all, it's a philosophical position that has no support to it. But secondly, you're not changing natural laws. You're overpowering them when you do a miracle or when God does a miracle. In fact, we can overpower natural laws. I'm overpowering a natural law right now. Which one? Gravity, right? If I can overpower a natural law, can the creator and sustainer of natural laws overpower them? Of course. Now, it's true, if there's no agent to intervene, yeah, natural laws will take over. But if I, as an agent, can overpower a natural law, the creator and sustainer of those natural laws can do so as well. So, miracles certainly are possible. The greatest miracle has already occurred, the creation of the universe out of nothing. Our only question now is, have any other miracles occurred since then that can help us understand which true theistic worldview, or which theistic worldview is really true? And for that, now we got to move on to the final question: are miracles possible? Now, you realize when I'm going through this, I'm skipping over a lot of stuff. The book has a lot more, the DVDs have a lot more than we can talk about, but I'm just trying to give you the bird's eye, 10,000 foot view. So let's go on to the question, is the New Testament true? We know we've got truth, God, miracles. Is the New Testament telling us the truth, particularly about the resurrection of Jesus? I'm not arguing for inerrancy here. Inerrancy is a conclusion, it's not a premise. I'm just trying to see if the documents we have give us enough information to be reasonably, reliably sure that the resurrection actually occurred. And in the book, we have the top 10 reasons we know the New Testament writers told the truth. I'm going to list 8 reasons here, but we're only going to look at 2 because we have limited time, all right? Very quickly. These all begin with the letter E. I'm not going to explain all of these. I'm just going to put them up here, okay? And you can get the book to figure out more. We have early sources. We have eyewitness details throughout the New Testament. We have embarrassing stories. I'll talk about that one and the fourth one, excruciating deaths, here in a minute. We also have embedded confirmation. By the way, that's the best evidence you've probably never heard that shows that the New Testament writers are independently witnessing the same historical events. And if you want to Google this and discover more about it, there's a lot on the internet about it. Just Google 2 words: undesigned coincidences. Undesigned coincidences. In fact, Lydia McGrew has a book on this, Hidden in Plain View, undesigned coincidences. I don't have time to explain it now, but if you Google that, or you get the book Stealing from God, we have some of these in there. There's expected predictions. That deals with Old Testament prophecy. We have extra-biblical writers, non-Christian writers in other words. And we have the explosive growth of the church out of Jerusalem, all right? These are 8 reasons I think that the New Testament writers are telling us the truth about what happened to Jesus, okay? We only have time to look at a couple of them this morning, so let's look at embarrassing stories and excruciating deaths. Now, what are embarrassing stories? What this means is that when historians look at a text, and there's embarrassing details in the text, either to the authors, or the characters in the story, their heroes in the story, it's probably true. Why do you think it would be true if it's embarrassing? Because you're not going to invent details that make you or the object of your cause, the message you're trying to put forth, you're not going to make that look bad. You're not going to make it look worse naturally. In fact, let me ask you guys a question in here. How many people in here have ever lied to make yourself look good? If you don't have your hand up right now, you're lying to make yourself look good. And it's not working, we know you're lying. All right, how many people have ever lied to make yourself look bad? No, you don't lie to make yourself look bad. You might lie to make yourself look good, but you won't lie to make yourself look bad. Well, it turns out that the New Testament writers, by the way, this is true of the Old Testament as well, but we're just looking at the New Testament. The New Testament writers have filled the New Testament with embarrassing stories that they never would have invented. These stories make them look bad, and even potentially Jesus look bad. That's why we call this the dove factor. They're not making this up. Let me just give you a few of these. The New Testament writers depict themselves as dim-witted. Right? I mean, how many times they go, we didn't know what Jesus was talking about. We didn't know what he meant. In fact, they don't really even get his mission until he's already ascended to heaven. And then they go, wow, I could have had a V8, right? Up to that point, they don't get it. Peter, their leader, is called Satan by Jesus. Do you think they invented this? I mean, Mark, who recorded that, do you think Mark at one point said to Peter, hey, Pete, I'm going to make this a real interesting story. I'm going to have the Lord call you Satan. What do you think Peter would have said? Have him call you Satan. What is he calling me Satan for? Look, I'm the leader. And then Peter says, Lord, again, he's their leader, Lord, I'll never deny you. What does he wind up doing? He denies him 3 times. And then at the crucifixion, all the disciples, with the exception possibly of one, run away. This is like a Monty Python movie. Run away. They all run away. And who are the brave ones? The women. The women are the brave ones. Why the men run away. Now, who wrote the New Testament down? Men. Now, what man is going to invent that he was hiding for fear of the Jews why the women went down and discovered the empty tomb? Would any man in here invent that? No. If I was inventing it, if I wanted to make myself look good, I'd write something down like this. Let's see, we marched right down there and overpowered that elite Roman guard. Yeah, that sounds pretty good. What do you think? Peter said, get out. Philip, roundhouse kicked him. John said, we'll be back. And then on Sunday morning, we marched right down to the tomb. And we saw Jesus, who congratulated us on our great faith. And then we went and comforted the trembling women. I would never say I was Mr. Sissy Pants. Why the women went down and discovered the empty tomb. Oh, by the way, do you notice that in that culture, first century culture, a woman's testimony was not considered on par with that of a man. So if you were making up the New Testament story, you would never have the women be the first witnesses. Yet all four Gospels say the women were the first witnesses, which is telling us what? They really were the first witnesses. They never would have invented this. I actually had a lady come up to me once and she said, Frank, I know why Jesus appeared to the women first. I said, why? And she said, because he wanted to get the story out. I said, that is an excellent point. I had not thought about that. Because ladies, when your man comes home from work, does he say much? There could have been a nuclear explosion down at the plant. He's not going to tell you. Right? You'll be watching the news 3 days later, and you'll be looking at it going, hey, hon, what? Yeah, I forgot to tell you. The nuke blew up 3 days ago. I've been hot for 3 days. Yeah. What's for dinner, right? He's not going to tell you. I can't even believe this verse is in the Bible. Do you know when Jesus is given the Great Commission in Matthew 28? He's standing there giving them the Great Commission, and verse 17 says this, as his disciples are gathered there, some believed, but some doubted. He's standing resurrected right in front of them, and some are doubting. It's like they're standing there going, you see that guy over there? Yeah. That guy over there is Jesus. Oh, no, it can't be Jesus. He was just killed not long ago. No, I'm telling you, it's Jesus. He was killed. The Romans killed him. They crucified him. It's him. Can't be. They know how to kill people, the Romans do. They crucified him. They put a spear in his side. Blood and water came out. Jesus is dead. It's him. It can't be. It is. How do you know? Women told me. They're not making this up. There's even potentially embarrassing details about Jesus. In Mark chapter 3, his own family come to seize him and take him home because they think he's nuts. Now, you may have heard the scholars say, well, the New Testament writers embellish Jesus to be God. Oh, really? Then why in Mark chapter 3 does it say his own family thinks he's nuts? Why would they put that in there? Jesus is also called a drunkard. He's called demon-possessed. You think they made this up? He has his feet wiped with the hair of a prostitute, which easily could have been seen as a sexual advance. Oh, by the way, you notice there are two prostitutes in Jesus' bloodline? Who are they? Rahab and Tamar. Do you think that Matthew and Luke, when they got together to put the genealogies down, said, you know what? This is the Messiah. I think we really need to spice up the Messiah's bloodline. Let's put a couple of prostitutes in there. What do you say, Rahab? No. In fact, there's a lot of shady people in the bloodline. Judah, from where we get the term Jew from, not a good guy. Read about him. Bathsheba's in the bloodline. In fact, when he gets to Bathsheba, he won't even mention her name. You know what he says in the bloodline, or in the genealogy? Uriah's wife. Ooh, that's a slam. Right? He's telling the truth, but it's a slam. Uriah is the husband of Bathsheba, whom David had killed so he could have Bathsheba. In fact, David's in there. David, a man after God's own heart. Yeah, but he's a liar, adulterer, and a murderer. Gee, I guess there's hope for the rest of us, huh? This is not a sanitized bloodline. They're telling the truth. You want the ultimate no-spin zone? Read the Bible. All the embarrassing details are in there. Now, there's many more I don't have time to get into. They're all in the books if you want to read about them. But you know they're not inventing this stuff. It's too embarrassing. Let's move on now to the fourth one, excruciating deaths. And this is the argument that says that these people who were in a position to know whether Jesus rose from the dead, and by the way, these people were Jews prior to becoming Christians. They already thought they were God's chosen people. They died excruciating deaths, saying Jesus had risen from the dead when they simply could have said, no, it never happened, leave me alone. This is actually a painting of Peter being crucified upside down. Now we have really good evidence that Peter, Paul, and James, and I think maybe Thomas, there's one other one that we have really good evidence that they died. Martyrs. There's lesser evidence for the other apostles, but there's nothing from the ancient world that ever says any of the apostles ever recanted. Why would they do this? In fact, take a look at the apostles' beliefs and practices before and after the resurrection. And it's absolutely critical to understand here that all the writers of the New Testament, with the exception of Luke, all of them are Jews, Jewish believers in Yahweh. They already think they're God's chosen people. So you got to ask yourself the question, why would they somehow create or invent Christianity if they're already God's chosen people? I mean, before Jesus shows up, they believed in animal sacrifice, right? They've been slaying lambs to Yahweh for hundreds of years. Suddenly Jesus shows up and they go, we don't need to do this anymore. Why? Because Christ's sacrifice covers all this. All these lambs we've been slaying are just symbols of the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. Here he is. They get rid of the sacrificial system virtually overnight. Before, they believed in a binding law of Moses. Afterwards, they say Christ's life fulfills the binding law of Moses. In fact, Christ himself does away with the dietary laws. And that's why I'm a Christian. It's not because of any of this evidence, because now I can eat bacon. Right? No, I mean, really, he does away with all that. He fulfilled the Old Testament. Before, they believed in strict monotheism. Afterwards, they believed in a Trinity, 3 persons in one divine essence. Yes, I know the Trinity is hinted at in the Old Testament, but it's much clearer in the New. Before, they believed in the Sabbath. In fact, they thought they could be stoned for not obeying the Sabbath. After, they're worshiping on Sunday. And Paul even says in Colossians chapter 2, don't let anyone tell you you have to obey any Sabbath or festival day. Why? What did the Sabbath represent? Rest. Who is Jesus? Jesus is our rest. We rest in his work. The Sabbath has arrived. In fact, out of the 10 commandments, 9 of them are repeated in the New Testament. The only one that isn't, keep holy the Sabbath. It's already been fulfilled. Before, they believed in a conquering Messiah. Afterwards, a sacrificial Messiah. Before, they believed in circumcision. Afterwards, they're believing in baptism and communion. Now, ladies and gentlemen, what would cause these pious Jews, again, who thought they were God's chosen people, to abandon everything on the left and adopt everything on the right virtually overnight and then die for it? The only thing I can think of is what psychologists call an impact event. What's an impact event? An impact event is an event that occurs in your life that is so dramatic, so impactful, that it can turn your perspective 180 degrees overnight. Some impact events are so dramatic that you might not remember what you had for breakfast this morning, but you'll remember an impact event that happened 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago if you're old enough. In fact, there's only a few of you in here that could probably answer this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. If you can remember where you were and what you were doing November 22nd, 1963, raise your hand and hold it up high. Hold it up high. Ladies and gentlemen, you see these people with their hands up? These people are very old. November 22nd, 1963 is my earliest memory. Yes, I'm 57 years old now. I know. I don't look a day over 56. In fact, when I turned 50, my wife was very encouraging. She said, honey, you're going to live to be 100. I said, how do you know? She said, because you look half dead already. I said, well, thanks a lot. Anyway, I was 2 years old in 2 days. I'm a toddler. I'm standing in the living room in our home in Wanamassett, New Jersey, and my mother is sitting on an ottoman in front of a black and white TV, weeping uncontrollably. Mommy, what's the matter? What's the matter? They killed the president. They killed the President Kennedy, assassinated that day. I can still see my mother right now in my mind, sitting on that ottoman when she was 26 years old. In 2 weeks, she's going to be 81. But I can see her when she was 26 right now. That's my earliest memory. I don't remember anything before that. And very little after that, actually. Where were you when the second plane hit the tower? Some of you, even going to this college, are old enough to remember 9/11. I was in my home office in Charlotte, North Carolina, where I live, and I had the TV on behind me, and I was talking to a pastor in the north side of town, and we were talking about me coming to his church, and we were trying to figure out what the topic would be. And I said, "Do you have the TV on?" He goes, "Yeah." I said, "Maybe a Cessna hit the World Trade Tower." And we're talking, and then suddenly he screams into the phone, "The second tower just got hit." I turned around, looked at the TV, the second tower's on fire. I said, "Was it a Cessna?" He goes, No, it was a big plane. It was a United plane. It flew right into that tower and exploded. I said, "You saw that?" He goes, "It was just on live TV." I said, look, let me call you back. I hung up the phone. And for some reason that morning I had CNN on, the Communist News Network. And I'm not making this up, but the commentator on CNN said, "One has to think there's some sort of navigational error here." He said, "Navigational error? You dimwit. This is the clearest day in the history of the Big Apple. What do you think, pilots can't see where they're going? You think Stevie Wonder's flying these planes? I mean, come on. This is terrorism." I called that pastor the next day. I said, "We're going to come to your church and talk about Islam because that's what this is related to." Now, 9/11 was over 17 years ago. And if I were to ask most of you where you were on that day, most of you are going to go, "Yeah, I remember." But if I were to ask you where you were 17 days ago, most of you are going to go, "I don't know, let me go with my iPhone. What was I doing that day? I don't know." Why can you remember something from 17 years ago, but not something from 17 days ago? Impact event 17 years ago. No impact event 17 days ago. Do you think a resurrection would have been an impact event? Do you think if Jesus really rose from the dead, that the disciples would have remembered it? And would have remembered everything Jesus said and did till the day they died? Of course. And that's the only way I can figure out why they would have abandoned everything on the left and adopted everything on the right virtually overnight. It was an impact event. In fact, what did the New Testament writers have to gain by making up a new religion? What did they get by saying Jesus had risen from the dead? Remember, they're God's chosen people. Well, they got excommunicated from the synagogue, and then they got beaten, tortured, and killed. Last time I checked, that was not a list of perks. Hey, we're going to start a new religion. We are? Yeah, what's it going to get us? Well, first we're going to get kicked out of the synagogue, and then we'll get beaten, tortured, and killed. Well, sign me up! What a great idea. Why haven't we thought of this earlier? No, I don't think so. In fact, they had every motive to say the resurrection did not happen, not every motive to say it did. You've probably had people come to you and say, "Well, are there any non-Christian writers that talk about Jesus and the apostles?" Yeah, they are. They're all in the book. But you know what is kind of underneath that question? An illicit assumption. What's the illicit assumption? Well, you really can't trust the New Testament writers because they were religious people. Religious people embellish stuff. They make stuff up. The secular writers we have to turn to for good information. If you think about that for more than 10 seconds, you realize how stupid that is. What motive did these people have to make this up? No earthly motive. They were already Jews. They're not inventing this. Why would they die for a known lie? You say, "Wait a minute, Frank. You just talked about 9/11. There are some Muslims who'll die. That doesn't prove Islam, but you're saying when Christians die, it proves Christianity. You can't have it both ways." No, that's not true. Why? Because there's a big difference between the New Testament martyrs of New Testament times and the Muslim martyrs today. The Muslim martyrs today haven't seen anything. They just have faith that Islam is true. The New Testament martyrs, on the other hand, were eyewitnesses to Jesus rising from the dead. They saw Jesus, they touched Jesus, they ate with Jesus. They verified with their own senses that Jesus had risen from the dead. Some people will die for a lie they think is the truth. Nobody will die for a lie they know is a lie. And the New Testament martyrs were in a position to know whether it was a lie or not, and they went to their deaths anyway. You can't get better evidence unless you were there yourself. So, let me say this about the New Testament. The New Testament writers did not create the resurrection. In fact, what I'm about to say, for those of you that go to this seminary, it may sound like heresy, okay, but it's not. Just stick with me for a second. Christianity is not true because the Bible says it's true. In fact, Christianity would be true if the Bible never existed. Why? Because Christianity did not originate with a book. Christianity originated with an event, the resurrection. Do you realize there were thousands of Christians before a line of the New Testament was ever written? Frank, how could you be a Christian without the book of Romans? Was Paul a Christian before he wrote the book of Romans? Yeah. Why was he a Christian? Because he witnessed a resurrected Christ. Was Matthew a Christian before he wrote Matthew? Yeah. Why? Because he witnessed a resurrected Christ. Was John a Christian before he wrote John? Why? Because he witnessed a resurrected... You get the idea. In other words, the New Testament writers did not create the resurrection. Why would Jews create this fictitious character? They wouldn't. The New Testament writers did not create the resurrection. The resurrection created the New Testament writers. You wouldn't even have a New Testament unless Jesus had risen from the dead. It's almost the case that just having these documents written by Jews from the first century is evidence enough that Jesus has risen from the dead. They certainly had no motive to make it up. Now, thankfully, these apostles saw it fit to write down what they saw so we could know about it and orient our lives according to what Jesus said and what the apostles said. But Christianity would be true even if the Bible never existed. So when you're trying to get somebody to become a Christian, don't try and say, well, we have this inerrant Bible here and you just have to believe it. Do you realize the apostles didn't do that? When the apostles were talking to non-Jews, they didn't go around saying, you got to believe in an inerrant Old Testament, then you can become a Christian. No. The apostles talked about the resurrection. And then, if the resurrection's true, it is, and if Jesus is God, he is, if he rose from the dead, then whatever God teaches is true. Jesus, therefore, then taught that the Old Testament was true. You get to inerrancy as a conclusion. It's not a premise. Don't start with that. End with that. Now, you don't have to believe in inerrancy to be a Christian, obviously, but that's a theological conclusion that inerrancy is true. It's not a premise. You don't need inerrancy to show that Christianity is true, as Gary Habermas has shown with his minimal facts approach. Christianity is true whether or not the Bible is inerrant. All right, it is, but we could go through more here. We don't have time. We got to finish this up. Let's just talk about the four major questions again. Does truth exist? The answer is, if somebody says there's no truth, you're going to say, is that true? Of course. Does God exist? Yeah, we went through those three arguments, the cosmological, teleological, and moral arguments. From those three arguments, we can see that there's a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent, moral cause who created all things and sustains all things to this very moment. Are miracles possible? 3 people say yes. What's the greatest miracle in the Bible? Genesis 1:1. If that verse is true, every other verse is at least possible. Even the atheists are admitting the data for Genesis 1:1. And is the New Testament telling us the truth about the resurrection? Yes, I think it is. We just went through that. For more, you can get the book and the DVDs in the cafeteria. Also, if you want this this PowerPoint presentation in a PDF form, again, text evidence to 44222. If you do that, you'll also get one video from us for a week, as Bob was talking about yesterday. We're now teaching online courses, which you can get on our website. We're also on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. Like our Facebook page, crossexamine.org and Dr. Frank Turek. If you do that, again, you'll probably see our live streaming events. And by the way, we're so into YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook, we've actually combined these three into one social media platform. We call it UTwitface. So if you haven't signed up for UTwitface yet, you should, all right? I mentioned radio and TV, and if you don't do anything else, download the Cross-Examined app. 2 words in the App Store. Cross-Examined. It's got the TV show, the radio show. It's got a quick answer section. So much more that you can get from that. So before we get to your questions, last thing here. Christianity's true. The question now is, so what? So what if it's true? Well, it means that somebody literally did die for you and rose again to prove it. In 2006, at Petty Officer Michael Monsour's funeral, just about every SEAL on the West Coast showed up for it. And as you know, the SEALs, their insignia is a golden trident. It's literally the most difficult insignia in any military to earn. Very few people who start SEAL training finish it. Maybe 10 or 15% do. So those that finish it and become Navy SEALs wear that insignia, the golden trident, with pride. It is their identity. Yet when the Navy SEALs showed up at Monsour's funeral, they took off their tridents, and as they passed his casket, they pressed those tridents into his casket. What they did is they took their identity and put their identity in their Savior, the one that died for them. That's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to take our identity and put it in our Savior, because that's where our identity is. But our culture is going to tell you to put your identity in anything but that. Put your identity in your political party. Put your identity in your sexual preference. Put your identity in your spouse. Put your identity in your race or your ethnic group. By the way, there's only one race, the human race. Put your identity in your bank account or your vocation or your children or your parents or your school or anything other than your Creator. The only way you're ever going to achieve contentment, happiness, is to put your identity in your Savior. And He came to die so we could do that. Hopefully everyone in here has done that. All right, let's go to questions. We've got about 13 minutes for questions. And we have the microphone set up, so since no one likes to ask the first question, we're moving right on to the second question. Second question, at the microphone so people can hear. Bob, are we giving books away?
Yeah, I'll give them away.
All right. Yes, sir, go ahead.
In the instance of the moral argument, I'm an undergrad student. I'm fairly new to the topic of apologetics, so I'm kind of getting all this. And what I've learned is that the opposition always has a counter argument. I wondered if you would just explain briefly what the counter argument is for the morality argument from the opposition and how we deal with that.
Well, there's two ways they can take it. They can say there are no objective moral truths, which, if you're an atheist, at least you're being consistent. The problem is we all know there are objective moral truths. Because on one hand, an atheist like Richard Dawkins will say, well, the God of the Bible's evil or something, or child abuse is evil. And of course he's right about child abuse being evil. But on the other hand, he'll say, look, we just dance to our DNA. There is no evil, there is no good. We're just molecular machines, we're just moist robots. There is no purpose to life. So he may take that view, or the other view is they'll try and say, well, evolution gives us morality. Well, the problem is that evolution, even if it's true, is a biological process. It can't yield a moral truth. Evolution might, if it's true, and I don't think macroevolution is, but if it's true, it might help us believe certain things about right and wrong, but it can't establish an external standard of goodness outside of ourselves to which we're obligated to obey. So evolution doesn't help them in that regard. In fact, the evolutionary morality, if you can get morality at all from evolution, is survival of the fittest. well, gee, I guess we ought to kill people in order, if we're fitter, so we can use their resources, like Hitler did, to create a super race. So evolution doesn't work either. There is no way to come up with a non-theistic, objective moral system. You have to try and smuggle morality in the back door of your atheistic system to make it work.
So it quite possibly could be the strongest or one of the strongest arguments for God?
I think the moral argument is one of the strongest arguments for God from a personal relevance perspective, because people realize that certain things are right or wrong. In fact, Louise Antony, who is an atheist, debated William Lane Craig, one of the top Christian debaters in our country. And she's an atheist, but toward the end of the debate, she admitted one thing. She said, any argument I have for atheism is weaker than the moral intuitions I already have that certain objective moral values are true, like torturing babies for fun is really wrong and loving people is really right. See, the certainty with which she holds objective moral values is so strong that any argument for atheism is weaker. So why would you be an atheist? You already know certain things are right and wrong. All right? Yes, sir. What's your name?
My name's Tim.
Hey, Tim.
Hey, just for curiosity, I was wondering if you counted, in your counting of the number of miracles in the Bible, if you included personal experiences like visions experienced by David and Solomon or some of those, and how would we do that today? Because some people, a lot of us have had personal experiences that we feel like were touches from God, but would those really count as miracles because they're not transpersonal, nobody else can see it, or how would you?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. It is an act of God if they really are true, but they're not what we call veridical. In other words, you can't verify them to somebody else. They're just inside of you. I'm not saying the Holy Spirit doesn't work that way. The Holy Spirit does, but I can't prove to you that I've had this experience if there's no external referent that I can show you, right? And with regard to your first question about the count, I'm giving an approximate count. My co-author on I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, Dr. Norman Geisler, has a fabulous resource called the Encyclopedia of Christian Apologetics, and he numbers them, all these miracles, in an article in there, and he bunches them up. So 250 is an approximate number. All right? Good question. Thank you. Yes, sir.
As far as scientific arguments go, why is it that you believe that we're able, obviously we're not able to figure out all things, but why is it that we're able to figure out the things that we're able to figure out by science? Do you believe it's just because of does that fall into general revelation, or like the evidence that we get from science,
Yeah.
Why would God, I guess, allow us to be able to figure out even that much?
Well, that's a question for atheists, not for us. Okay? And this is a question John Lennox, who debated Richard Dawkins, and you should watch his debates online. He and Dawkins had some wonderful exchanges that he kept posing to Richard Dawkins. Why is this a rational universe? Why can my mind ascertain truths external to me, and I can then therefore arrive at conclusions about the real world? It seems because there's a great mind out there who set this whole universe up with all the natural laws, and his nature defines the laws of logic and the laws of mathematics, and our mind is made in the image of the great mind so we could know truth, and we could ultimately then know him. That's why we're here, to know God and to make him known. It's a problem for atheists who think that we're just molecular machines. How could we know anything if we're just moist robots?
Right.
We're not reasoning, we're reacting.
And also, where would you suggest, I know that a lot of the stuff, scientific evidence, you said you get from other places. Where would be a good place to get those scientific evidences of, the universe, of this, how many stars there are?
Oh, that kind of thing. Okay,
yeah.
well, some of that is in our book, Stealing from God, and I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, but I'm standing on the shoulders of other people
Right.
when I write that kind of stuff. So a guy like you, Ross, has a lot on the astrophysicist part of it. When it comes to biology, the best people out there are people like Stephen Meyer and Jonathan Wells and Michael Behe and Doug Axe and Casey Luskin. These are all people, and Philip Johnson. These are all, or many of these people work at the Discovery Institute out in Seattle, Washington, and if you go to discovery.org, you can see many of their works.
Okay.
And with regard to the evolution question, while some of it is in our book, Stealing from God, there is a couple of podcasts you may want to listen to where I interview Stephen Meyer. One is from, say, I think September 2014. If you get our app, you can go back to this. And it's called 5 or 4 Problems with Macroevolution. And then in January of 2017, I had Stephen Meyer and Doug Axe on the podcast, and the title of it is 5 Royal Problems with Macroevolution.
Okay, thank you very
All right.
much.